The Adventure of the Devil's Foot. Throughout my long friendship with Sherlock Holmes, as I have endeavored to record the more curious cases I was privileged to observe, I have often found myself obstructed by a most inconvenient obstacle: Holmes himself. He has never had the slightest taste for spectacle. Applause irritates him. Public admiration amuses him only insofar as it is misdirected. Indeed, one of his keenest pleasures lies in handing over a successfully concluded case to some mediocre official and watching, with a thin, ironic smile, as the chorus of praise is lavished entirely upon the wrong man. If, in recent months, I have failed to present my readers with new adventures, it is not for lack of material. Quite the contrary. It is solely due to my friend's reluctance to see certain matters committed to print. As the companion who has stood beside him through these affairs, I could hardly betray his confidence by publishing cases he expressly wished suppressed. It was for that reason that I was so astonished when, last Tuesday, I received a telegram from Holmes. If a telegram was possible, he would never resort to a letter. It read, "Why not write up the Devil's Foot? Most remarkable case I have ever undertaken." I confess I could scarcely comprehend his sudden change of heart. What impulse had driven him to resurrect that old affair? Whatever the cause, I knew I must act quickly. He was perfectly capable of sending a second telegram retracting the first. I therefore consulted my notes and resolved to lay the matter before the public without delay. In the spring of 1897, relentless work had begun to show upon even Holmes's iron constitution. His complete disregard for his own health only worsened matters. Dr. Moore Agar of Harley Street, whose dramatic introduction to Holmes I shall recount one day, spoke with unusual firmness. Unless Holmes abandoned his cases and took an extended rest, he would collapse entirely. Holmes might ignore his well-being, but the prospect of permanent incapacity, of losing the ability to work, was intolerable to him. Thus, in the earliest days of that spring, we found ourselves installed in a small cottage at Poldhu Cove, on the far edge of the Cornwall Peninsula. It was a place entirely suited to my patient's severe temperament, wild, stark, and steeped in atmosphere. Our whitewashed cottage stood upon a grassy headland, its windows overlooking the sinister crescent of Mounts Bay. The coastline was a death trap, towering cliffs and wave-eaten reefs where countless sailors had met their end. When the north wind blew, the bay appeared calm and welcoming, a haven to storm-battered ships. But should the wind veer suddenly to the southwest, a violent gale would arise, leaving the sheltered shore untouched while dragging anchored vessels mercilessly onto the rocks. Amid the boiling surf, desperate sailors fought their final battles. Seasoned seamen gave that treacherous bay a wide berth. The landward side of our cottage was no less forbidding. A desolate moor stretched outward, gray and wind-scoured, where thorny shrubs rolled like tumbleweed across the open waste. Here and there, the towers of isolated churches marked the positions of scattered villages. Across the moor stood strange stone monuments, grotesque cairns containing the ashes of the dead, and primitive earthworks that spoke of forgotten races and their ancient struggles for survival. The somber mystery of the place stirred Holmes profoundly. He spent long hours walking alone across the moor, immersed in thought. Ancient Cornish lore absorbed him, and he became fascinated with the Cornish language itself. If memory serves, he theorized that it bore kinship to Chaldean and had been carried there by Phoenician traders. He ordered a stack of linguistic volumes to elaborate upon this curious hypothesis. He had scarcely settled to his research when a problem more enigmatic and more troubling than anything we had left behind in London arrived unbidden at our door. The incident cut through our quiet life like a blade. It distressed me deeply. Holmes, on the other hand, greeted it with unmistakable satisfaction. The affair, which shook not only Cornwall but much of Western England, occurred almost at our very threshold. Many readers may recall the incomplete accounts in the London press under the heading The Cornwall Horror. 13 years having passed, I now present the full truth. Of the few church towers scattered across the moor, each marked a village. The nearest to us was called Tredannick Wallace, a settlement of scarcely 100 souls clustered around an ancient, moss-covered church and a handful of modest cottages. The vicar, Mr. Roundhay, was an amateur archaeologist and soon struck up an acquaintance with Holmes. He was a courteous, middle-aged gentleman with intimate knowledge of the district. It was during a visit to take tea at his residence that we were introduced to Mr. Mortimer Tregennies, who rented a room in the vicar's large and otherwise empty house. Both men being bachelors, the arrangement offered companionship to one and modest financial relief to the other. They were, however, not natural companions. Mr. Tregennies was dark, thin, and wore spectacles. His stooped posture gave the impression of physical deformity. During our brief tea, the vicar conversed freely, yet his lodger scarcely spoke, sitting with a troubled expression and averting his gaze. It was clear that something weighed heavily upon his mind. On the morning of March 16th, having finished breakfast and begun our customary pipes before a walk upon the moor, our small sitting room was suddenly invaded by these very two gentlemen. A most extraordinary tragedy occurred last night, Mr. Holmes, cried the vicar breathlessly. An event without precedent. There is not a man in all England who could unravel it but you, and by God's grace you are here. I confess I regarded him with irritation at this intrusion upon our peace. Holmes, however, removed his pipe and straightened in his chair like an old hound catching the scent of game. With a gesture, he invited them to sit. The agitated vicar and his tense companion took their places side by side upon the sofa. Though Mr. Mortimer Tregennies appeared more composed, the tremor in his thin hands and the unnatural brightness of his dark eyes betrayed his agitation. "Shall I explain?" he asked the vicar. "Or will you?" "As you were the first to witness what we do not yet understand," said Holmes calmly, "it would be preferable to hear it from you. A second-hand account is never as reliable." As I cast a discreet glance at the hastily dressed clergyman and his impeccably attired lodger, I saw upon their faces the unmistakable astonishment produced by Holmes's small but devastating deduction. Mortimer Tregennies had not uttered a word until that moment, yet it was plain to me that the strain he suppressed exceeded even the vicar's agitation. He sat with a pale, sunken face, his anxious eyes fixed unwaveringly upon Holmes. His thin hands were clasped so tightly together that the knuckles shone white. As he listened to the account of the calamity that had befallen his family, I saw his bloodless lips tremble. In his dark eyes lingered the reflection of something dreadful, something he could not unsee. "As you wish, Mr. Holmes," he said at last, with strained eagerness. "Though it pains me to speak of it, I shall answer whatever questions you put to me. Then tell me what occurred last night." As the vicar has said, I dined with my brothers and sister. Afterward, my elder brother, George, suggested a game of cards. We sat down at 9. When I left the table, it was 10:15, and all three were in excellent spirits. "Who saw you out?" "No one. Mrs. Porter had already retired. I closed the sitting-room door behind me and left the house. The window of the room where my brothers and sister remained was shut, though the curtain had not been drawn. This morning, both door and window were exactly as I had left them. There was not the slightest indication that anyone had entered. My brothers were seated at the table, their wits entirely gone from terror. Poor Brenda's heart must have failed her under the horror of it, for she was dead, her head hanging over the arm of her chair. I shall never forget that sight as long as I live. What you describe is of the utmost importance, Holmes said quietly. I presume you have formed no theory as to what befell them. It was the devil's work, Mr. Holmes. The devil's, cried Mortimer Tregennies. It must have been something supernatural. Whatever entered that room drove my 2 brothers mad and killed my sister outright. How else could such a thing be done? If the affair is indeed supernatural, Holmes replied evenly, then it lies beyond my province. But before we accept such a conclusion, we must exhaust every natural explanation. Mr. Tregennies, you chose to reside separately while your siblings lived together. I assume there had been disagreements between you. Am I mistaken? You're not. There were unpleasantnesses in the past. Our family once operated a tin mine at Redruth. We sold it to a larger company and retired upon the proceeds. I cannot deny that disputes arose over the division of that money, and that for some time relations were strained. Yet those matters were resolved. Of late, we were on the best of terms. Cast your mind back to last night. Does any detail, however trivial, suggest itself that might illuminate this tragedy? Pray consider carefully. The smallest hint may prove decisive. Nothing occurs to me, sir. Were your siblings in their usual spirits? I have rarely seen them more cheerful. Of nervous temperament? Did you observe the least sign that they anticipated danger? None whatsoever. Is there any other circumstance, anything at all, you can offer? Mortimer Tregennies reflected deeply before answering. At length he said, "There is one thing. While we were playing, my back was to the window. George, who was my partner, faced it. At one point, I noticed him staring intently over my shoulder. I turned. The window was closed, the curtain undrawn. I saw only the bushes on the lawn, but for an instant it seemed to me that something moved among them. I could not say whether it was a man or an animal, yet I had the impression that something was there. When I asked George what he was looking at, he said he had noticed the same. That is all. You did not step outside to investigate. No, we attached no importance to it at the time. Did you leave the house with any foreboding? None. One more point, said Holmes. How is it that you received news so swiftly this morning? I rise early and customarily take a walk before breakfast. As I had just begun, the doctor drove past in his carriage. He told me Mrs. Porter had sent a boy in haste to summon him. I immediately joined him, and we returned together. Upon arrival, we witnessed the scene I have described. The candles and the fire had burned out hours before. It was clear my brothers had sat there in the dark until dawn. The doctor stated that Brenda had been dead at least 6 hours. There were no marks of violence upon any of them. She lay against the arm of her chair, that ghastly expression fixed upon her face. George and Owen were singing, jabbering incoherently. They resembled 2 great apes in their madness. It was hideous, unspeakable. Even the doctor turned white. He collapsed into a chair and had to be helped outside. Holmes rose and took up his hat. Strange, profoundly strange, he murmured. We must lose no time in going to Tredanic Wartha. I confess I have never encountered a case which, at first glance, presents such singular features. Our examination that morning added little to the solution, yet one incident, occurring at the very outset, left a deeply unpleasant impression upon me. The house lay at the end of a narrow, winding village lane. As we approached, we heard the rumble of wheels and stepped aside. A carriage passed us, and through its closed window, I glimpsed a face pressed to the glass. A face transformed, as though by demonic possession. The clenched teeth were bared in a fixed grin. The eyes burned with a wild, piercing intensity. My brothers, cried Mortimer Tregennies, turning deathly pale. "They're taking them to Helston." We watched the black carriage sway down the lane, bearing its wretched occupants toward confinement. Then we resumed our approach to the ill-fated house where their strange destiny had unfolded. It was a handsome residence, more villa than cottage, set within a broad garden bright with early spring flowers. The sitting room window looked out upon this garden, and according to Mortimer Tregennies, whatever had unseated his siblings' reason must have come from there. Before mounting the veranda, Holmes paced slowly among the flower beds and along the gravel paths, deep in thought. He was so absorbed that he struck his foot against a water bucket, sending a small flood across the path and over our boots. Inside, we were received by the elderly Mrs. Porter, who managed the household with the assistance of a young maid. She answered Holmes's questions with simple frankness. She had heard nothing during the night. Of late, the family had been in excellent spirits. Indeed, she could not recall seeing them happier. When she entered the room that morning and found them seated thus around the table, she fainted from terror. Upon recovering, she opened the windows for air, then ran out and sent a lad to fetch the doctor. For strong men had struggled to place the deranged brothers into the asylum carriage. Mrs. Porter declared she could not endure another day in that house and intended to leave for her family in St. Ives that very afternoon. We went upstairs to view the body. Though well into middle age, Miss Brenda Tregennies had been a striking woman. Her dark, well-defined features possessed uncommon beauty. Yet he sat in various chairs, shifting them back and forth, testing their positions. He measured how much of the garden was visible from each angle. He examined the floor, the ceiling, the fireplace. Yet there was no sudden illumination in his eyes, no tightening of the lips that signaled discovery. Suddenly he asked, "Why was the fire lit? Is it customary to have a fire in so small a room on a spring evening?" Mortimer explained that the night had been damp and chill, and that the fire had been lit after his arrival. "And what do you propose to do now, Mr. Holmes?" he asked. Holmes smiled and laid a hand upon my shoulder. "I believe, Watson, that I shall resume, despite your entirely reasonable objections, the tobacco poisoning experiment which you attempted to forbid," he said lightly. "If you will excuse us, gentlemen, we shall return to our cottage. I see little prospect of discovering anything further here. I must reflect carefully upon what we know. Rest assured, Mr. Tregennies, that if I reach a conclusion, you and the vicar shall be informed at once. For the present, good day." Shortly thereafter, we were back at our cottage. Holmes curled into his chair, pipe between his lips, the blue smoke rising in such density that his grim expression was almost obscured. His black brows were drawn together, his forehead taut, his gaze fixed vacantly upon some distant abstraction. At last, with sudden impatience, he flung the pipe aside and sprang to his feet. "It is useless, Watson," he said with a short laugh. "Come, let us wander along the cliffs and hunt for flint arrowheads. We stand a better chance of finding one than of discovering a clue to this affair at present. To force the brain without sufficient material is to overstrain an engine. It ends in ruin. For now, what we require is sea air, sunlight, and patience, my dear Watson. The rest will come of its own accord." As we walked together along the edge of the cliffs, the Atlantic heaving below us in long, iron swells, Holmes spoke at last. "Let us conduct a calm assessment of the situation, Watson. We must cling tightly to the very limited material at our disposal, so that when fresh information emerges, we may fit it neatly into the gaps. I assume you, like myself, do not attribute this to the devil. Let us settle that point first." He glanced sideways at me, the wind tugging at his coat. We are dealing with three individuals who have met a dreadful fate as the result, conscious or unconscious, of a human agency. That much is clear. Now, when did it occur? If we accept Mortimer Tregenny's account as truthful, it must have happened almost immediately after he left the room. That is crucial. The cards were still on the table. Despite the lateness of the hour, they had neither retired nor even pushed back their chairs. Therefore, the event must have taken place within minutes of his departure, and certainly before 11 o'clock. He paused, scanning the horizon as if the sea itself might yield an answer. Our next step must be to verify Mortimer Tregenny's movements after he left the house. That proved remarkably simple. You, who know my methods, will have guessed that overturning the water bucket was not mere clumsiness. I required a clean impression of the man's footprint. The damp, sandy road yielded it perfectly. You will recall that the ground was wet last night as well. With a specimen in hand, I was able to compare it to other tracks nearby. It appears that Tregenny's walked briskly toward the vicar's house. Holmes folded his hands behind his back. If Tregenny's left the house, and if the tragedy was caused by some external intruder, how are we to identify that person? And by what means could such a person have inspired terror so profound? We may dismiss Mrs. Porter. She is plainly harmless. Is there evidence that someone crept up to the garden window and frightened the occupants to death or madness? We possess only Tregenny's testimony. You will recall his brother's remark about something moving among the bushes. That detail is significant. The night was cloudy, wet, and exceedingly dark. Anyone wishing to be seen from within would have had to press his face against the glass. There is a flower bed, a yard wide, beneath the window, yet not a trace of a footprint upon it. How then did an outsider produce such terror? And why employ so bizarre a method? You perceive the difficulties we face, do you not, Watson? Perfectly, I replied. It is not insoluble, Holmes continued, provided we obtain more material. I suspect that in your extensive archives, you will find cases no less formidable. But until further information presents itself, let us lay this aside and devote the remainder of the day to the Neolithic inhabitants of this peninsula. I had long admired Holmes's ability to detach himself from a problem, but never had I witnessed it displayed with such mastery as on that Cornish morning. For 2 hours he discoursed upon Celtic migrations, flint arrowheads, and shards of prehistoric pottery as though no sinister enigma hung over us. Yet upon our return to the cottage that afternoon, an unexpected visitor drew our thoughts sharply back to the matter at hand. We both recognized him instantly, the large, rugged figure before us. With his lined, weather-beaten face, hawk-like nose, fierce eyes, and a mass of graying hair that seemed almost to brush the ceiling, was as well known in London as he was in Africa. His beard, yellowed at the edges from constant pipe smoke, framed a mouth set in habitual severity. The man was none other than the celebrated lion hunter and explorer, Dr. Leon Sterndale. We had heard he was in the district and had even glimpsed his imposing form striding along the moorland paths, but he had not approached us, nor had we expected him to. He was reputed to value solitude above all things. When not in Africa, he spent most of his time in a small cottage at Beecham Ariance, living austerely among his books and maps, taking little interest in his neighbors. It therefore surprised me greatly that such a man should address Holmes in a tone of keen curiosity. "The local police are entirely mistaken," he declared. "Perhaps you, with your experience, may arrive at a rational explanation. Few know it, but during my stays here I became acquainted with the Tregenny's family. My mother was Cornish. The Tregenny's are, in fact, distant cousins. You will understand that their strange fate has deeply shocked me. I had set out for Africa and had reached Plymouth when I received the news this morning. I returned at once to assist in the inquiry." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Then you have missed your ship? I shall take the next." "Remarkable devotion. I told you, we are related. On your mother's side, yes." "Had your luggage already been loaded aboard?" "Some of it. The rest remained at the hotel." "I see. Yet the morning editions of the Plymouth papers could hardly have carried the news." "No, I received a telegram." "May I inquire who sent it?" A shadow crossed the explorer's stern features. "You are thorough, Mr. Holmes." "It is my profession." Sterndale mastered himself. "There is no reason to withhold it. The village vicar, Mr. Roundhay, summoned me." "Thank you," said Holmes. "As to your first question, I have not yet formed a definitive conclusion, though I have every confidence that the matter will be resolved. For the present, that is all I can say." "Could you indicate where your suspicions lie?" "I am afraid not." "Then I have wasted my time coming here." With visible displeasure, the famous hunter took his leave. 5 minutes later, Holmes himself departed. I did not see him again until dusk. His slow tread and somber expression suggested that his inquiries had yielded little. He read a telegram awaiting him and cast it into the fire. "It is from the Plymouth Hotel, Watson. I obtained its name from the vicar. I wired to verify Dr. Sterndale's account. He did indeed spend last night there and has forwarded part of his luggage onto Africa." "What do you infer?" "That he is deeply concerned with this matter." "Deeply," Holmes echoed. "There's a missing link here. Watson, something we have not yet grasped. Once we find it, the knot will unravel. Rest easy. We lack the key, but when it appears, the rest will follow swiftly." I did not anticipate how swiftly. The following morning, as I stood shaving before the window, I heard the rapid clatter of wheels and hooves. Looking up, I saw a carriage racing toward our cottage. The vicar leapt out before it had fully stopped and hurried across the garden. Holmes was already dressed. Together we went out to meet him. "The devils are upon us, Mr. Holmes," he cried. "Our poor village is cursed. Cursed by the devil himself." At last he delivered the dreadful news. Mortimer Tregennies was found dead last night. The same fate as his siblings. Holmes sprang to his feet. "Will your carriage hold the three of us?" "It will." "Then breakfast must wait." "Watson, quickly. We must reach the house before anything is disturbed." Mortimer Tregennies had rented 2 rooms in the vicar's house, a sitting room below and a bedroom above. As neither doctor nor police had yet arrived, everything remained untouched. The scene I beheld that mist-laden March morning is etched forever in my memory. The room possessed an oppressive, heavy atmosphere. A lamp upon the table still burned faintly, emitting a thin thread of smoke. Mortimer Tregennies sat back in his chair, his sparse beard jutting forward, his spectacles pushed up upon his brow, his gaze fixed toward the window. His face, like his sister's, was contorted by terror. His fingers were rigid, his body stiff as stone. Holmes transformed the instant he crossed the threshold. His posture tightened, his eyes gleamed, his movements grew swift and precise. He stepped out into the garden, re-entered through the window, then moved upstairs. After a brief examination of the bedroom, he threw open the window and returned once more to the garden, where he lay flat upon the ground, studying it with intense concentration. Holmes examined the lamp upon the table with meticulous care. He measured the oil reservoir, inspected the dust upon the chimney with his lens, and carefully scraped away a portion of the grayish residue clinging near the top, sealing it inside an envelope. As the doctor and the police were expected at any moment, he turned to the vicar. "Kindly request that they direct their attention to 2 points, the bedroom window and the sitting room lamp. Considered together, They bring us very close to the truth. 2 days later, Holmes announced that he intended to conduct an experiment. In both tragedies, he said, the atmosphere of the room affected the first person who entered. Therefore, there was poison in the air. In both instances, something was burning. First a fire in the grate, then a lamp. It follows that the toxin is released through combustion. He had retained half of the powder he had scraped from a lamp. We shall now light the lamp, Watson. The window will remain open. If the symptoms grow dangerous, we abandon the experiment immediately. He sprinkled a small quantity of the powder onto the flame. The odor spread almost at once, faint, yet loathsome. Within seconds, my mind clouded. A black vapor seemed to coil before my eyes, and within it lurked an indescribable horror. My heart pounded wildly. My breath shortened. My thoughts began to unravel. I glanced at Holmes. His face had gone ashen. With a final effort, I staggered to my feet, seized him by the arm, and dragged him outside. We collapsed upon grass. The clean air worked gradually. The black cloud receded. Holmes spoke at last, his voice unsteady. "My dear Watson, I owe you both thanks and an apology. Such an experiment ought not to be conducted even upon oneself. To have involved you," he broke off. "I am profoundly sorry. I confess I was deeply moved." Holmes was not a man who readily displayed emotion. "It is always a privilege to assist you," I replied quietly. He recovered his customary half-ironic composure. "There was, in fact, no necessity for the poison to drive us mad, Watson. Any rational observer, learning that we had attempted such a test, might have concluded we had already lost our wits. I must admit, however, that I did not anticipate so swift and violent an effect." He hurried back inside, carried the still-burning lamp at arm's length, and flung it into a thicket of brambles. "Let the place air itself," he said. "I imagine you have no further doubts as to how those tragedies occurred." "None whatsoever." "Precisely. The mechanism is clear. The motive remains obscure. Let us retire to the arbor. That infernal substance still scorches my throat." We seated ourselves beneath the wooden shelter. The evidence points overwhelmingly toward a single individual, Mortimer Tregennies, Holmes began. "In the first instance, he was the murderer. In the second, the victim. We know there were past disputes within the family, ostensibly resolved, but reconciliation may be superficial. Consider his narrow, fox-like face and those calculating eyes behind his spectacles. He was not a man inclined toward forgiveness." He paused thoughtfully. "You will recall his mention of something moving in the garden. That detail diverted us for a time from the true line of inquiry. He had reason to mislead us. Moreover, if he did not introduce the substance into the fire, who did? The event occurred almost immediately after his departure. Had a stranger entered, the occupants would have risen. In quiet Cornwall, no one pays social calls at 10 o'clock at night. All signs point to Mortimer." "Then he must have taken his own life," I suggested. "It appears plausible on the surface. A man who has killed one sibling and driven 2 others mad might destroy himself in remorse. Yet we possess strong evidence against that hypothesis. Fortunately, there is one person in England who knows the truth. I have taken the necessary steps. He will explain everything himself today." At that very moment, the garden gate creaked open. "Pray come in, Dr. Leon Sterndale," Holmes called. "Our cottage is unfortunately unfit for guests at present owing to certain chemical experiments." The famed African explorer advanced slowly up the path, casting a curious glance at the arbor. "You sent for me, Mr. Holmes. Your note reached me an hour ago. I do not know why I am here, but here I am." "You shall know shortly," Holmes replied calmly. The matter concerns you intimately, and it is better that we speak where no ears may overhear." Sterndale removed his cigar and regarded him sternly. "What matter could possibly concern me so closely?" "The murder of Mortimer Tregennies." For a fleeting instant, I wished my revolver were at hand. Sterndale clenched his fists and took a step toward Holmes, his face flushed crimson, his eyes blazing. Then, with visible effort, he mastered himself. His regained composure was more formidable than his rage. "I have lived long in places where the law is absent," he said coldly. "I'm accustomed to administering justice myself. Bear that in mind. I have no intention of harming you." Holmes answered evenly. "The fact that I sent for you instead of the police should make that clear." Sterndale sank into a chair, opening and closing his hands in agitation. At last he drew a photograph from his breast pocket and flung it onto the table. "For her," he said. The young woman in the photograph was strikingly beautiful. "Brenda Tregennies," Holmes observed. "Yes," Sterndale replied hoarsely. "I loved her for years. She loved me. I could not marry her, for I am bound to a wife who deserted me long ago, and English law will not release me." The vicar knew everything. He sent the telegram. When I learned of her dreadful death, what were trunks or ships to me? His voice faltered. He produced a small packet from his pocket. Upon it, in red letters, were the words, "Radix Pedis Diaboli." "The devil's foot root," he said. "Almost unknown in Europe. Certain tribes in West Africa employ it for torture. It stimulates the brain's fear centers. Madness or death follows." He had once shown it to Mortimer, explaining its effects. Mortimer had likely stolen some portion at that time. "When I heard what had happened, I knew at once that this had been used," Sterndale continued. "Had I gone to the police, I could not have proven it, but I could exact justice myself. I subjected him to precisely what he inflicted upon her. At dawn he had gone to the vicar's house, roused Mortimer by tossing pebbles at the window, entered the room, lit the lamp, and placed the poison upon it. From outside, he watched as Mortimer succumbed within 5 minutes, his death hideous and absolute. There was not a trace of remorse upon his face as he finished. "There's my story. I place myself in your hands." Holmes remained silent for a long moment. "What were your intentions afterward?" "To return to Central Africa." "Then return," said Holmes quietly. "I shall not interfere." Sterndale rose slowly, bowed gravely, and departed without another word. Holmes lit his pipe. "Let us indulge in smoke free of toxins this time, Watson," he remarked. "I trust you agree that we acted rightly in abstaining from intervention. If we conduct an independent inquiry, our judgments must likewise be independent. Would you have informed upon him?" "Certainly not." Holmes allowed himself a faint smile. "I have never loved Watson, but had the woman I loved met such an end, I cannot say that I would have chosen differently." A moment later his tone resumed its familiar coolness. "My starting point was the gravel upon the windowsill. It did not match that in the vicar's garden, but it corresponded precisely to the gravel at Sterndale's cottage. The lamp burning in daylight, the residue upon the glass, each formed a link in the chain. That was sufficient." He drew deeply upon his pipe. "And now, Watson, we may dismiss the matter from our minds. With our consciences at ease, we may return to the Chaldean roots of the Cornish tongue.